High in the sky, the sun was dispensing its power down upon Brotel, to the bane of any who had decided to go out in the middle of the day without any cover. Though in defense of the dozen or so strong gaggle of Gretchen and Snotlings that was currently rummaging through some rubble, they had not gone out of their own volition. Gurgi, one of the grots in question, felt as if he was shrinking from the heat, his mouth gaping open and his tongue sticking out as he breathed heavily to ventilate his insides, with limited success, as his maw was drawing faster than it was able to bring cool inside of him. In between his raspy breaths, however, he felt something pleasant land on his tongue. Shortly after, his big nose also picked up a similarly delightful aroma. As he turned to follow it, the dryness of Gurgi's maw slowly went away as saliva began building up in it, thanks to the smell growing stronger and more sublimely pungent. The invisible trail led him to a huge pile of scrap and rock that seemed to have been a Humi hut at some point, but the details of that did not matter at all to the grot as he located a hole in the rubble from which the nectary scent was emanating. Too small for an orc, the crevice in question would be tight for even an above-average-sized Gretchen. To his luck, however, Gurgi was just small enough to be able to barely squeeze himself in. No consideration hit him about how he was going to get out, as his mind was overtaken by the now overwhelming, almost viscous stench. The protection from the sun was an added bonus, as the crevice was significantly cooler than the outside, making his effort all the more worth it when he finally found the treasure he had been tracking. Beneath the slabs of permacrete, impaled by exposed pieces of rebar, he saw it, the decaying corpse of a Humi. Drawing closer for a better look, Gurgi surmised that it must have been one of the Humi grots, as it was smaller than the other Humis he had seen, estimating it to be even slightly smaller than himself. Such details did not matter to him, however. Gathering intelligence was not something he was interested in. Instead, he just wanted to claim his prize. Gurgi's clawed fingers sank into the sides of the Humi's head, and he pulled back, encountering no resistance in ripping it off, due to its advanced state of decay. Grinning from ear to ear, he brought the head up to his own face and began gnawing on it. His teeth were not able to properly puncture the skull, but the flesh on the outside had become soft enough for the Gretchen to practically lick it off of the bones with relative ease. Its taste was refreshingly damp and moist, further relieving the heat that Gurgi had been exposed to until now, with the right, ripe pungency only ever found in fermented squig meat. In the middle of his meal, after having gulped down most of the surface flesh, the grot saw the Humi's exposed teeth. They were smaller than even regular Humi teeth, so they were not as valuable, but he remembered what a boss grot told him and a few other grots once. Teeth is teeth, no matter what for. Incredible wisdom, dispensed right before the gang of other verminous greenskins ripped him to shreds, since they had not eaten for a while back then. Satisfaction coursed through his mind at the thought that he would be getting some teeth on the side, in addition to a hearty, delicious meal, while the other Gretchen would not. Positively brimming with excitement, Gurgi began to happily pull the teeth off of the skull, while trying to suck out whatever was in it through the eye sockets. Just as he plucked the last one, and before he could pocket all of them, Gurgi's joyful expression was replaced with immediate concern, as he felt both of his legs be grabbed in a single hand. The very next moment, he was yanked out of the hole, still clutching to the head and loot he had gotten. Suspended in the air, Gurgi found himself dangling upside down and face to face with an angry orc, wearing goggles and a strangely tall hat.
What you digging there for? Not working like the rest of the grots?
The orc menacingly inquired.
Found a dead Yumi, boss. Even pulled his teeth for you.
Gurgi's reply was pathetically meek, a disposition enhanced by him cautiously bringing up his hand, which held the teeth, and dropping them onto the orc's extended paw. The larger greenskin observed him for a couple of moments until his face contorted into a grimace and he bellowed, while throwing the teeth away.
You think you can slack off for such useless Yumi? Grot teeth? Worthless lazy git. I oughta crump you right now to shine me boots.
He then yanked the skull out of the Gretchen's hands and forcefully threw Gurgi onto the rubble.
Get back to work! For I see you slacking over again. I'll eat you instead.
After yelling, the orc threw the Hume's skull in his mouth and crunched it.
Yes, boss. Right away, boss.
Just as the Gretchen saluted in affirmation, several loud bangs filled the air, and its handler almost fell forward as he bellowed in pain before turning around. At that point, Gurgi reflexively raised his hands to protect his head, briefly noticing several large holes on the side of the orc's torso. More bangs followed, this time striking the larger greenskin in the front and actually collapsing him. Slowly, the Grot stood up and looked around, spotting the motionless bodies of the other orcs that were looking after their pack flat on the ground. All of the other Gretchen were standing up, gawking in shock similarly to himself, until his vision was demanded by a hand shoved down in his face. Gurgi winced away in a defensive gesture, expecting further abuse, but when none came, he cautiously looked back to see that the hand belonged to another Grot, who wore a red coat and a big pointy hat, which seemed to be like the one worn by the hard yelly bosses of the Humes, who was smiling at him. Stricken with awe, the less sharply dressed Greenskin took his spear's hand and was pulled up to his feet. Now he could also see 4 other, better-dressed Gretchen, all of which had large shooters with steaming barrels, and an additional 2 that pushed a big rock over to their boss. Maintaining the smug grin on its face, the boss Grot turned around, unfurling his coat to flutter for a moment and dazzling the other diminutive greenskins, before climbing up the rock for everyone to see, flanked by his guards. For a few moments he surveyed the gathering Gretchen, giving them all time to approach and be within proper earshot. Once he deemed everyone to be in position, he pulled out a chopper polished to shine in the sun and raised it high in the air, yelling out,
"Hear me, brother Grots! For too long we've been bullied and beaten by the Orkies. They's always holding the Daka, taking all the nicest scrap, shiniest gubbins and all the teeth stolen, gathered by hard-working Grots. And what do they give us for it? Nothing. Just more yelling, more beatings, and a lot of times eating."
All around them, the small mob of greenskins was becoming more riled up. Gurgi felt himself boil up from the inside, not due to the scorching sun, but out of anger for his mistreatment at the hands of the orcish handlers.
"But this all ends now.
The boss Grot continued.
No longer will Grots be bossed by those stupid squeakdumps. We shall rise up in glorious revolution and snick the orcs and make 'em work for us from now on. The tyranny of the big uns gonna be toppled by the fury of the small."
The crowd erupted in a cacophony of cheers and jeers, intermingled with curses towards the bigger orcoids and praise for the revolution. Seeing the success of its speech, the boss Grot's smirk widened into a proud grin as he let loose one final bellow into the air.
"Join me, brother Grots. Together we'll be unstoppable. With the blessings of Gork and Mork, and lead us to freedom as the Red Gobbo.
In the middle of the battle cry, a red flash of light surged through the air, followed by a loud echo, until it impacted the boss Grot's head, causing it to explode in a burst of gore. Instantly, the cheering ceased, as the Gretchen jumped in surprise, followed by great confusion on what had just happened.
Huh. Guess Gork and Mork didn't really want to bless him.
Gurgi spoke out absent-mindedly before turning to the guard Grots.
Does this mean the revolution's over?
No. No!
One of the guard Grots took to the fore, climbing up on the rock, picking up both the hat, which he put on, and the shiny chopper, which he then raised in the air.
So our first boss didn't please the gods. The revolutionary spirit still lives on in us. I is second in charge. I'll be the boss now and lead us to winning as the new Red Gobbo.
The scene repeated itself as another loud flash of red light exploded the Grot's head. As its body dropped to the ground, the other guard Grot's expression contorted into one of extreme concern. It looked from side to side for a bit before saying,
Actually...
It then grabbed Gurgi by the hand and pulled him up on the rock next to itself, put the hat onto him, and handed him the shiny chopper.
This here brave grot volunteers to be our new boss. Let's all welcome the new Red Gobbo!
Following which, he whispered to Gurgi.
Lift the chopper and say wah. All proper like, right?
Gurgi himself was immensely worried by this prospect. He had never been the boss of anything. At most, he would backstab and cheat a few other Gretchen at a time, but only for personal benefit. Would Gorkenmork truly favor him for such a big and important job? Due to this hesitation, he sheepishly lifted the chopper in one hand and meekly called out.
Wag?
As soon as the word left his mouth, the grot clenched its eyes and teeth shut, wincing its head to the side as it awaited the decision of the gods, along with all the other Gretchen who had become so quiet they even ceased breathing for a few moments. The red streak of judgment came once more, loudly announcing itself before lethally impacting. Gurgi was prepared to meet his scolding by the great deities of Greenskindom with dignity, but to his surprise, after hearing the blast, he did not stop feeling different. Thus, he slowly opened his eyes and saw that the grot who had pulled him up on the rock was the one that got its head blown off, but he himself was unharmed. Perhaps this was indeed a sign that he was the true chosen one to lead this revolution.
Yeah, that's right. Gorkenmork picked me.
He began to maniacally laugh as he burst into a small dance on top of the rock. Along with him, the rest of the greenskin mob began to once again rile up into their fervorous state, matching his own energy.
We's gonna find more, Yumi Duck, and we's gonna sneak and grab all the big gets, and then the Grot's gonna be the bosses of this place. Work for us, work for me, and the new Red Gobbo! Wag! Wag!
All of the Gretchen bellowed out with fury as they gathered up around the rock in a tight formation, as to bask in their new leader's glory. Just as they did so, the bang of the Red Judgment was heard again, and a whole lot more times as beams of red blasts rained down on the gathering, ripping the grots to shreds.
What? But, what? Why? I thought I was pegged!
Gurgi could barely question before his own head was turned into a smoldering red mist.
See, I told you having a scope would be better, even if it's not Mordian made. You should consider yourself lucky that we were able to find a scope that fits a triplex in this place to replace your broken one.
Gargota addressed Dan, who was fidgeting with the adjustment of his lasgun. The man in question grumbled, clearly displeased by what was currently transpiring, as he hefted his weapon on top of the rubble pile they had moved behind during their recon when they climbed this section of hab blocks.
I suppose having an off-brand component that functions is closer to proper regulation than an officially issued one that is broken.
He grudgingly uttered before asking,
Is that gaggle of greenskins still in the field below? I want to test it.
Yep.
Steelix replied almost instantly, as she was already looking through the scope of her longlass, hefted on the same rubble pile and aimed at the destroyed hive section below them.
It seems that they are having a mutiny, I guess. A bunch more of the smaller ones showed up and shot up all the orcs.
I shouldn't be surprised that Xenos scum also have damnable traitors among them. Double duty fulfillment today, it is then. Killing both the alien and the traitor at the same time.
Kost mused as he adjusted the dial of the scope and fired. His shot echoed through the valley before taking off the head of the mutiny's apparent leader.
Hit and kill confirmed.
The Armageddon noted.
Fair. But I didn't like the small blur and glare this product produces. Let me try a different setting.
After adjusting, he once again aimed and shot, this time gunning down the next greenskin that had put on what the Mordian presumed was their own version of a commissar's hat.
Another successful takedown.
Dan lingered his sight on the scope for a bit more before uttering,
I guess this was better. But I'm still getting this feeling that this is wrong. Maybe I should tinker with the setting a bit more.
If you say so, old man. I'm keeping watch to give you better confirmation.
Wordlessly, another change to the scope settings was made, followed by another shot. This time, Cost cursed at the new modification and at its inadequacies.
I think this is the first time I have seen you miss. Or, well, you did kill that one, but I thought you were aiming for the one with the head again.
I was. This piece of unregulated trash just shows its abysmal colors.
The Mordian growled out, clearly annoyed by what had just transpired.
Whatever. I guess I'll make do with the last setting since it fits best for me.
With those words, he further adjusted the scope and once again hefted his lasgun over the rubble and aimed down sights.
Let's just terminate those vermin already. Knowing they are still breathing Imperial air offends me.
In response, Gargota shrugged her shoulders and also took aim, following which the two of them picked off the rest of the Gretchen mob. Once target practice was over, the pair returned to the squad's meeting point and were apparently the first ones to return.
I guess that little extermination took less time than we thought. I will go do a sweep around, just in case. You can get the truck ready for takeoff, I suppose.
A small checkup wouldn't do it any ill, true. Fine then. Go prance about, go. Try not to get killed.
The first lieutenant just chuckled at his remark and saluted, before turning around and heading off. Cost did not give much of a reaction, bar a light nod of his head, following which he moved over to the front of the truck in order to inspect it for any inconsistencies in performance. As he turned the corner of the vehicle, however, Dan was halted by someone calling to him.
Hey, Soot, get over here.
Turning around, the captain's grimacing glare collided with the blank, almost soulless visage of the grenadier's skull-plated mask, the wearer of which was approaching him with rapid velocity. Huffing out a small steam of air, the Mordian spat out whilst opening the door of the driver's seat and returning his focus to the vehicle.
What do you want, boy? I have better things to do than—
His words were interrupted by the Krieger slamming the door shut with one hand as he loomed over the older man, his heavy breathing, muffled by his respirator, causing him to give off the impression of an angry Grox about to break out of its pen.
What the fruck are you permitting yourself to do?
Gruber sternly let out, his free hand grasping Koss by the collar of his uniform under his throat.
Just because you're the Commissar's pet toy soldier, you think I'll just sit through you screwing with me?
In comparison to his junior, the Mordian remained coldly stoic. Johann could notice how his eyes slowly looked down at the hand, crumpling his uniform, before lifting and piercing through the glass eyes of his gas mask.
Watch your tone, boy.
Dan spoke in a matching menacing manner, following which he gripped the Krieger's wrist with one hand and squeezed, pressing his thumb on the median nerve between the ulna and radius at the base of the wrist. Johann did his best to hold firm, but the swelling pressure of his blood eventually made his own grip loosen, until he finally and grudgingly let go of the uniform, stepping back as his senior threw off his hand from himself and added,
And the same goes for your hands. Just because you are useful, I'll let you off with a warning this time. Crumple my uniform again, and I will be ironing it out with your face.
Koss threatened, fixing his collar before asking,
Now, what nonsense in the Emperor's name has infested that rot bag you call a brain?
That useless vermin civvy was throwing uncomfortable questions at me.
Those specific words momentarily broke the Mordian's contempt-fueled calm, until his junior added,
He was talking weird, as if he was flirting with me. Talking about how he didn't think my face was ugly, specifically noting that those thoughts came to him after speaking to you.
At that point, Gruber's fury crashed against a mockingly dismissive chuckle emanating from the target of his wrath.
What's so funny?
The quartermaster demanded. Stifling his chuckling, the captain obliged him with a response.
I am amused, because I initially thought the Brotelian had spotted you coming to the commissar the previous night, and was questioning you about it.
No, he didn't give any indication that he knew anything about it.
Johann firmly stated, his tone and posture oozing viscous malice as he returned to the subject matter at hand.
And you don't change the subject. Remember, Suit, Commissar's orders are for me to die last. Your turn on that line heavily depends on how much effort I care to put into keeping you in it, or taking you off it. You will not talk about me, or my world, with anyone beyond Mission Essential. Verstanden?
Rather than the intended intimidation, that statement only earned Gruber a dismissive side glance as Kost once again opened the driver's side of the truck. Glass eyes still locked onto him, the Krieger followed close behind him, still trying to assert his authority over the other. After opening the door and putting away his lasgun and other luggage inside, Dan calmly spoke in an almost mocking manner.
Intimidation of a superior officer, premeditated insubordination, skirting around direct orders, attempting to subvert the rank and file, and allowing your uniform to become a dirty, breathing hazard. With nearly every action you've taken since we've met, you've proved that your kind are nowhere near the elite everyone sings your praises for. You just feign diligence through suffering, as any basic menial can. And your competence is likely just the result of there being such an excess of your flesh that the problem put before it are just smothered from its weight.
He closed the door and attempted to go to the front, while adding,
Though I guess the one concession I can give you is that you were faultily manufactured.
Just as he took a single step, the Mordian felt a dull pain above his elbows as the grenadier grabbed him by the arms, lifting him off the ground for a brief moment before slamming him into the door, denting it slightly, and yelling in the captain's face through his gas mask.
I am not manufactured!
The youth was clearly enraged, releasing several deep and muffled breaths before his grip slightly loosened when realization struck him. Kost, in turn, grunted after having his back impact the metal, before speaking in between breaths as well.
So, we have a natural-born cockroach on our hands. That explains a lot. Not being cast from the mold accounts for all the inconsistencies. The commissar was right to ask why aren't you on horseback or digging trenches.
How do you know?
Johann yelled, once again tightening his grip on the other man's arms.
How do you know about that?
I've been in the personal service of high-ranking individuals for almost double your lifespan, boy. One tends to pick up a few things in that line of work.
The reply was menacingly demeaning.
You're a threat. Your casual blabbering about was aggravating, but now that I know you know this, I can't just let you breathe anymore.
Is that so, cockroach? Well, you'd best put on your big boy pants for that.
After saying so, using the momentary confusion brought on by the statement, Dan lifted his lower arms, using his knuckles to hit the inside of Gruber's elbows, forcing the taller man to let go of him, following which he pushed the Krieger back with both hands to his chest, causing him to stumble. Before the quartermaster could regain his footing, the captain launched a right hook into his face. The impact itself did no real damage, as the target was protected by its helmet and gas mask, Bark causing a very thin gash of blood to form on Kost's knuckles due to catching the rim of the helmet, but the force of the punch, thanks to the Mordian's own comparable mass, combined with Gruber's stumble, resulted in the larger man being thrown down on the ground. Johann fell on his right arm, and as he was about to get up, Kost's full body weight pressed itself over him, pinning him to the ground while grabbing his left arm, yanking it back and pressing it under the pin as well. In addition to the strain on his arms, the most prominent sensation the Krieger could feel was the Mordian's knee pressing itself between his shoulder plates. He would continue to struggle to get up until the prick of a knife's point registered on his neck, prompting him to stiffen in submission. At that point, through heavy breaths, Dan addressed him frankly.
Cat might be twice as scary as I am, but unlike you, who was born and raised to drown his foes in self-pity with your broken corpse, I was born and raised to put down rabid punks that turn streets into charnel houses, just because their rations were late by a few days.
Within the confines of his mask, the young man bared his teeth and was about to bark back when his mind processed what was just said.
Cat?
He confusedly asked.
Since when do lapdogs speak about their master so casually?
There was a brief pause of a few heartbeats before a stern reply was given.
You have your secrets, I have my own.
After saying so, Dan removed the point from his junior's neck and instead struck the back of his helmet with the pommel of the knife, then released him and allowed the daze he had produced with his strike to give him the couple of seconds necessary to safely stand up. Finally free, Johann slowly got up as well, balancing until he towered to his full height, once more glaring at his senior.
You're not the typical Pansy suit, are you?
A mutter escaped him.
You'd be surprised how common my type is.
A significantly calmer and softer response. Kost would then sheath his combat knife, straighten his coat, and adjust his cap.
My care for you and your planet's dealings are far below what you imagine it to be, boy. Quit wasting time on drama and get useful.
With a more dignified look restored, he would turn his back to Gruber and start walking to the front of the vehicle in order to check on it under the hood.
There should be some soft hammers and tools in the back. Dig them out and get to fixing that door. No vehicle under my command is permitted to have such disfigurements without seeing battle.
In a couple of steps, the posh one was no longer in sight. All the while, Johann stood motionless and continued to stare in his direction. Without removing his glassy gaze from the direction where the Mordian had walked in, he reached a hand into one of his satchels and took something out of it. Slowly, his eyes would lower to look upon the can-sized grenade clutched between his fingers, which had the words, "Gift to Volke," plastered on it, along with a serial code for the device. Once more he returned his attention to the Mordian, who was making busy with the truck's insides, his thumb almost playfully caressing the pin for several heartbeats before the grenade was returned to its resting place in the satchel. Growling to himself, the Krieger went to fetch the tools he was told of so he could begin fixing the damage he had caused. Later on, when the group had made another stop, Katerina would use the allotted break time to once again review the map and try using the vehicle's Voxcaster to try intercepting any friendly communications, but was only rewarded with static. Once it was time to pack up, she stepped out, ready to shepherd her flock, but was surprised by a sudden stream of curses in a particular type of low Gothic, followed by booming laughter. Moving around the truck, she saw that everyone was gathered in one place, particularly the Catachan, the Armageddon, and the Maccabean sitting around a relatively thin slab of rockcrete placed on top of two bricks as a makeshift table, the three of which were responsible for the aforementioned sounds, while the rest were just sitting to the side on some other debris, quietly observing their compatriots. Erconi would raise an eyebrow at the whole display, confused by its purpose, as she slowly walked over to the observers. Once among them, she would rest her elbow on the sitting Johann's shoulder, who in turn tensed at the gesture, which she ignored before asking.
So, anyone care to enlighten me on what in the Emperor's name is going on?
As she did so, she made a small mental note of Bobson slightly flinching when she came into contact with the Krieger, following which he tried to give a reply.
The good corporal went in a semi-sermon of sorts, going on about how good, honest, and truth-abiding servants of the Emperor always attain victory, because they have his favor.
So the monkey and the other jungle critter, seeing an opportunity to unnecessarily risk bodily harm, challenge him to a game of chance to prove his statement correct.
Lawrence casually chimed in.
Emperor, damn you both!
Ramil bellowed out in frustration.
Okay.
The commissar muttered, as her mind began to connect the dots of what was afoot, but she continued just to be sure.
I'll bite, I guess. What's gotten him so worked up then?
Well,
Richard began.
the corporal doesn't really have a filter, and he is brutally honest. And the game they challenged him to is...
The Brutulian didn't really have the heart to finish the sentence. As if waiting on cue, however, Dusk finished his statement for him in a flat tone.
Liar's dice.
Aha! I am to understand that Mr. Burgundy has not had much of the Emperor's favor until now?
He hasn't won a single game yet.
The private sighed out and shook his head, before returning his gaze to the playing trio.
At this point, he's 3 weeks' worth of rations in debt.
The Cadian spoke up, unflinching from his viewing as well.
It's like a tank crash. You can't really look away due to the morbid fascination of how the grisliness will develop, even though we all have a pretty good idea of what's about to happen. So much so that even the 2 statues over there are mesmerized by it.
There is something oddly satisfying about it.
Johann uttered. Meanwhile, Kost simply gave a quiet nod of agreement. Katerina, in turn, would sigh and then breathe in deeply before adding.
Fascinatingly, I am inclined to agree as well.
She briefly returned her gaze to her bodyguard when she spotted a thin line of dark red, recognizable as dried blood, over his right hand's knuckles.
Kost, what happened to your hand?
After uttering the question, she could feel Johann tense up once again, but he relaxed when the Mordian gave his response.
Just some friendly competition, sir. No barter of rations was involved.
Picking up on the sentiment, she just nodded in affirmation and returned her gaze to the 3 players as the 5 of them continued to watch their game in silence. On the other side of the gathering, things were significantly hotter as Ramil's veins were bulging on his forehead from frustration.
One more round, triple or nothing. This is just your preparation for my grand victory.
Suit yourself.
Gus smugly stated.
He is driven, if nothing else.
Gargota chuckled. All 3 rolled the dice in their cups before flipping them over and shutting them on the slab between them, then peeking under to see their results. The Maccabian lowered his cup and grimaced at the amused snotling and the almost giddy monkey sitting across from him, following which he placed his bid.
2 1s.
Both of his opponents shared a chuckle. Afterwards, Gargota lowered her own cup and spoke.
I keep telling you, bidding safe right off the bat is not a good start. 2 2s.
Oh, come on, Steelix. You're just being mean to him. But if that is how we are going to roll...
Wild Knife looked Burgundy in the eyes and momentarily wiggled his eyebrows as he lowered his cup and bid.
3 1s.
Sweat broke over the corporal's brow as he did his best to glean any kind of information out of the pair's expressions for several intense moments, until he decided to try and lure more information out of them with a somewhat exaggerated move.
Damn both of your deceitful tongues. The Emperor shall guide me, and you will grovel at my feet once I'm through with you. 3 4s.
This time, their smiles faded and they adjusted their sitting positions as tactical thought had to be counseled.
There might actually be some truth to your words, at least this time.
The first lieutenant pondered out loud, but shortly after lifted her eyes, stealing a look at her opponents until she came to a decision.
I say we turn up the heat slightly. 3 6s.
Ramil's eyes twitched with mild worry at the raise, but it shifted into confusion, as did Gargota's own expression when the second lieutenant began to laugh.
Honestly, playing with you two is one of my better ideas. You are both so easy to read.
He leaned forward, a grin plastered over his face as he uttered,
5 6s.
Croc shit!
Burgundy cursed and stood up in frustration.
There is no way a third of all the dice on the table have landed on the highest possible side.
If you think so, call me a liar. I dare you.
Wildknife smugly taunted as he leaned back, his grin growing wider.
Oh, I will! You are a liar and a scoundrel who deserves to spend an eternity among the damned, and with the Emperor and Drusus as my witnesses. By the time we are done with this, that shit-eating grin will be gone from your face. Flip him!
With one final confident shrug from the Catachan, the three lifted their cups to reveal their sets.
Thrown, damn it!
Steelix angrily exhaled as she threw her cup to the ground. Wildknife, on the other hand, subdued his expression to a smile as he shrugged.
Never said a false word in my life, with the Emperor as my witness.
At the end of those words, he shot the corporal a wink.
No! This is all wrong!
The Maccabian bellowed as he grabbed and flipped their table over to the side, a surprised "Hey!" being let out by the commandos as all the dice spilled in various directions.
You cheat! All day long! Somehow, I know it! You are somehow looking at our dice, or you're some hidden mutant witch that sifts through our minds!
Oh, shut your trap, your holiness. Stop making excuses and accusations just because you're bad at the game. If you want, we can go another round if you bet that helmet of yours. I've been needing a good shovel replacement.
And thus the final straw was found, processed and loaded, breaking the dam of Ramil's patience as he roared and spear-tackled the Catachan to the ground, the two beginning to brawl viciously. All the while, Gargota carefully excused herself away from their rolling struggle.
Yep, figured we were gonna reach this at about this time.
They're really going at it. It reminds me of when I had to wrestle a mutated rat for a pack of corpse starch.
Richard's unusual remark earned him a glance from the other observers. It took him a moment to notice, at which point he confusedly added,
What? The district was shut off for a couple of weeks and rations were hard to find.
In any case, I better stop this before they damage each other beyond repair.
Katerina said as she stepped forward. In the short span of time that the pair had been rolling on the ground, they had both heavily bruised each other's faces, with the occasional bloody gash getting ripped open. Gus was barely able to restrain the thrashing armored man by getting on top of him and wrapping an arm around his neck. At that point, both of them pulled out a knife, and just as they were about to sink their blades into each other, their actions were halted by a lasbolt striking the ground inches away from their heads. Looking up, they were met with the barrel of a las pistol and the commissar's bemused face.
Yeah, this feels much better to do now that I know I'm not wasting valuable ammunition.
She mused, then sheathed her weapon and added,
If you're quite done, get up. This is an order.
The pair remained motionless for a couple more moments before calmly releasing their grip on the other, standing up, sheathing their weapons and dusting themselves off, all in an orderly manner. It was a sight that was even more spectacular to the Brotelian than the fight itself.
Whatever, I'm just going to enjoy myself a nice dinner this evening.
The Catachan smugly said as he smirked at the Maccabian.
Oh, really? I take it you found some bountiful source of sustenance that is too perishable to keep in reserve to share with everyone?
Well, not exactly. I just fairly won myself some extra rations during our friendly set of games, is all, sir.
And you generally thought I would permit that?
Arconia rhetorically asked with bewilderment in her tone. She would walk up to both of them and clap her hands together, then bend her wrists to point at them.
Rations are being rationed for a reason. They don't belong to you to barter and gamble as you wish. They are to keep you maggots from croaking prematurely. I will not stand suboptimal performance because some idiots decide to throw away the necessary intake of nutrients over bravado and a stupid game of dice. If you've taken any more food and water than you were permitted for today, then put it back with the rest of the supplies, immediately.
Katerina would then turn her head to the side to look at Gargoda, who was seemingly skulking away from the educational session.
That means you too, Steelix.
Understood, sir.
The Armageddon sighed in defeat. While the others dispersed since the show was over, Gus's cheerful mood was brought down to a visage of defeat as well. It was only disturbed when he heard Ramil quietly laughing next to him.
What's so funny, conhead?
In response, the corporal looked at him with genuine glee plastered all over his face, following which he spoke with confident satisfaction.
I told you, monkey, by the time we were done with this, that shit-eating grin will be gone from your face. The Emperor favors the faithful, despite your shit attempts at sowing doubt in me with your lying dice.
With that, Burgundy picked up his helmet and walked away. Grumbling, Wildknife tried to restrain his irritation, but was only able to do so for several moments, resulting in him shaking his fist in the air as he yelled at the ever more distant Maccabian.
It's called Liar's Dice, and you suck at it!
The following couple of days proceeded more uneventfully, so much so that they felt more like they were dragging along. Chugging along the roads, the truck was quietly humming, rattling when it ran over the occasional piece of debris. It all made for a drowsy atmosphere where almost everyone had taken the time in order to get some additional shut-eye in the back of the truck. Even Katerina herself felt her gaze narrowing from the drudgery. Cost and Bobson were the only ones more active, given that they had the active roles of driving and following the map to the Underhive Highway. For the Brotelian, there was also the added stress of being near the Commissar without revealing what he had seen and heard. He was almost entirely convinced that she knew, since he was not able to fully prevent himself from flinching, looking away, or other suspicious behavior escaping him around her, even more so when she interacted with Johann and called him over for medical checkup, something that the private had begun to think meant something different. But despite that, Gruber showed no signs of any kind of abuse. If anything, he seemed to be growing more and more relaxed around everyone, while in the meantime, even if she knew that Richard knew, Arconi did not say anything about it and just allowed Bobson to stew in his own thoughts. Some psychological form of torture crossed his mind on a few occasions, but not today. Their current drive was as leisurely as people in their situation could ask for. Everyone's calm was disturbed by the wailing cry of Static, which was suddenly roused from the truck's Voxcaster.
What the hell is going on?
Gus voiced the collective thought in their minds.
We appear to be intercepting some kind of transmission.
Are we sure this isn't an attack of some kind?
Only one real way to find out. Cost, halt the vehicle so that we can try getting a clearer sound stream.
As the truck's engine was silenced and it stopped on the road, Arconi began working on the dials of the Voxcaster in an attempt to tune it to the frequency of whatever they were intercepting. Richard, who was holding onto the map, looked in awe at her, then mentioned,
I have to admit, sir, I am surprised that you can operate that. In our academy, only a select few cadets got selected to utilize Voxcasters, due to being handpicked by the officers they would service.
Dan and a few of the others shot him a questioning stare, but Katerina herself didn't even bother looking at the Brotelian as she replied in a flat, matter-of-fact tone.
I'm not performing rocket surgery on a strike craft or a piece of ammunition, Private. That is tech priest work. Your ward's facility may be lacking, but just learning how to operate a basic, yet useful tool like a Voxcaster is something relatively simple to pick up in the Schola Progenium.
While Richard sank into his seat from embarrassment, the Commissar was able to tune the Vox to the correct frequency with which to patch the intercepted message through.
Please, Emperor, please let someone hear this. Hello? Is anyone out there? I've been stuck in here for I don't know how long. We were escorted by the troopers, but they were killed on by a band of those monsters. They brought a building down on us. I think that I'm the only one. Someone, please help.
Crackling static obscured the voice too much to determine its owner, but it could not mask the distressed sobbing intermixed with the words. Bobson's heart sank with worry and sadness for his fellow Brotelian. Seemingly at the flip of a switch, those feelings were replaced by dread when he heard his squadmates speak their minds, since, despite the lack of voice clarity, they were able to immediately identify what the one sending this message was.
A useless civilian, and one begging for rescue. Would have served the Emperor better if it just up and died, along with the rest of them.
I relinquished my winnings, but I ain't sharing my rations with a civvy that can't dig themselves out of a hole.
Frankly, I don't fancy digging them out either. There probably won't be any merit in it.
Gus and Johann he could understand, but hearing Lawrence speak so casually about not saving a life flabbergasted Richard, his eyes bulging and mouth opening in disbelief as he slightly rose up to look over his seat at the ones riding in the back.
Whoever it is, they should be glad to be laid to rest alongside their peers. It is better than what most menial achieve in their lifetimes, so it should be a comforting thought.
Ramil added to the inhuman horror, while also crossing his hands in the shape of the Aquila. It all compounded more and more on Bobson, since the transmission was unceasing, and what he was hearing was overlaid by the pleas and crying of the trapped soul, who now appeared like a wounded factory worker begging for their life before a council of uncaring nobility that were only interested in their profits, not being impacted by its continued existence. Completely ignoring the stunned Brotelian, as if he was not even in the vehicle with them, Gargota leaned on the backrest of the front seat and casually asked the commissar,
So, what should we do about this?
A scowl claimed Katerina's face, following which she closed her eyes and exhaled deeply in thought. By now, the commotion in the truck had died down, save the heart-wrenching transmission over the Vox, and everyone was looking at Arconi awaiting her orders. Richard turned his own pleading eyes towards her, voicelessly begging her to heed the cries for help and order the squad to provide aid. Another deep inhale followed by a bitter sigh came from her before she gave her verdict.
There's no need for such hostility towards someone who is clearly suffering. But it is not something we can bother with right now. We must prioritize reaching our destination as—
No!
Complete, utter, deafening silence gripped the vehicle, even drowning out the Vox transmission, as all eyes now converged on Richard, who was breathing heavily, a wrathful visage, something unusual for him, coloring his face as his gaze bored directly into Katerina. The atmosphere carried an energy similar to realizing an explosive's fuse had gone off in close proximity, which drastically increased when words were resumed.
You've got 10 seconds to change that tone, apologize, and explain yourself.
Are you serious? Are all of you serious?
Bobson almost yelled out as he looked towards the rest of the squad, then returned his gaze to the commissar.
Has everyone here completely lost their humanity? Is it not the Imperial Guard's duty to guard mankind?
Going beyond the allowed 10 seconds, the private looked at Ramil as if seeking affirmation for his next words.
A soul is praying to the Emperor for salvation from a grisly demise. Through our service in his armies, are we not his agents, and is it not our duty to answer such a call?
That's not how that works.
Before Burgundy could finish his repudiation of the younger man's logic, he instead turned to glare at the Cadian.
Then if it has to be about value, whoever this is can operate a Vox, a skill I do not have. Add to that the fact that anyone can hold a gun and fire it in the direction of the enemy, as well as that there is some function and equipment near them. An expedition to rescue them would yield more benefits than digging me out of the bunker you found me in.
Lawrence gave no response, instead looking away, stopping his field of vision on the floor of the truck. Lastly, the outraged youth gave one final personalized statement.
If this outburst of mine warrants my termination, then I'll happily save you even the last bolt, as I am prepared to leave any and all equipment on me to you and venture out with nothing but the skin on my bones, in order to find and help whoever is calling. Think of me what you will, but this world's people, my people, are good people. As a member of the Brutalian Planetary Defense Force, it is my Emperor sworn duty to defend them, and nothing will stop me from fulfilling that.
Unyielding determination oozed off of Richard, feeling almost smothering to Katerina. A feeling which was enhanced by his intense red glare boring into her own, eliciting a memory of a similar argument she had in the past with someone of higher and bigger stature than anyone present. A groan would escape her as she closed her eyes and pressed her fingers to the ridge of her brows, in a vain attempt to lessen the strain on her nerves.
Alright, reason has prevailed. Monkeys, you'll get a spare helmet to fight over.
Johann dismissively said as he returned to his relaxed position before the Vox message was intercepted. Despite that, Richard remained undeterred and continued to observe Arconi's every move and gesture, barely managing to see her lips moving as she mouthed something out.
You're just missing the Promethean bath and the green paint shop.
What was that?
I said you make for a convincing speaker when you find your spine private.
She almost growled out as her head lifted, so she could counter Bobson with a glare of her own.
Your words do hold a kernel of truth, so I will humor you this once.
The Krieger's head almost shot to the side, indicating disbelief as he looked to the front seat. Gus was mildly tickled by that gesture and huffed out a smile.
However, you'll be splitting your rations with this person if they're able to move. But if they're too damaged to function, or if they're suboptimal at earning their keep through service, you will personally be delivering the Emperor's mercy to them. Understood?
Richard's face brightened up, the righteous fire on it being replaced with gratitude and admiration. He would firmly nod, then salute and confirm.
Sir, yes, sir.
After acknowledging him with a nod, Katerina would once again focus on operating the Voxcaster.
Will you be sending back a message that we have heard them and request their position?
No, we cannot do that. This isn't a command vehicle, so it's only equipped with a receiver. What I'm doing is trying to find out the direction from which the sender signal is being emitted. Since PDF was mentioned, that means that this message is not coming from a Vox speed, but a proper caster. So it can be rather far away. But being buried under rubble might reduce the device's effective range and interfere with the signal. So, quiet down for now.
With his enthusiasm slightly pacified, the Brotelian quieted down to allow Arconi to focus. Even though the occasional grumble came from the back of the truck, the Commissar's decision to render aid, spurred mostly from an interest in the equipment and possible meat shield that would be found, was finalized and the vehicle trudged away towards the now fading transmission. For nearly 2 hours, they would drive west of their previously planned course, but at the very least they were descending, which made the delay of traversing this short but uncomfortable distance bearable for the more goal-oriented of the group. Whoever had initiated the transmission had stopped speaking, likely due to their lungs no longer being able to support speech, but they did the intelligent thing of leaving their Voxcaster on, allowing the squad to track them, even while only hearing their haggard breathing. This sidetrack would culminate in them coming upon a wide alley, littered with the corpses of greenskins, PDF intermingled with civilians, and a few obliterated vehicles, which stood in front of a large rubble pile. Lawrence and Gargota would make a quick sweep of the area while the rest made their way onto the rubble and carefully began digging through it, with Katerina guiding them on the signal's direction from the truck. In their search, the sergeant was not able to find any equipment on or near any of the ravaged corpses, surmising that whatever Orkoids had survived the engagement must have picked them clean, while the first lieutenant's investigation led her to believe that the battle had taken place 2 days ago, based on the corpse's state of decomposition. As soon as they were done, both would return and report their findings to the Commissar. Shortly after they were done, the digging squad's own progress was reported by the next best communication device to a Voxcaster. Gus's lungs.
Found him, sir.
A of understanding escaped Katerina as she nodded in by reflex, even though she knew the Catachan could not see her from this distance and angle.
Sergeant, you stay with the truck and have it ready for departure. I'm going to see what manner of worm the birds have caught. Lieutenant, follow me and keep an eye around us, just in case.
The pair saluted in affirmation as Arconi descended the vehicle and walked towards the rubble. She had in mind to scold the monkey for yelling and give away their position, but decided against it since no Xenos activity had been encountered for miles, and they had no plans of staying here for long. His call had been produced when the digging team heard a muffled but clearly feminine voice call out to them after lifting up a few layers of debris.
Hello? Oh, Emperor, is anyone there? Please don't let it be more Xenos.
Don't worry, ma'am. We're here to rescue you. Just keep talking so we can more quickly find you.
Richard eagerly called out to her.
Oh, thank you. Thank His Grace. Yes, I'm down here. My legs are pinned, but I don't think they're broken as I can still feel them.
Following her voice aided in speeding up the uncovering by concentrating the digging efforts in specific directions. Her guidance and thanks were cut off by a shrill shriek as the last slab blocking her vision was lifted, revealing the terrifying masked visage of the quartermaster.
No, please. Do not scream.
The private jumped into her view in order to calm her. Finally seeing the woman left him rather stunned for a moment. She was dressed in white robes, which were stained with patches of faded red, most likely dried blood, which had come from the beheaded corpse wearing the Brotelian PDF's uniform clutched in her embrace, along with its Voxcaster backpack. As she quieted and apologetically shook her head, Wildknife loomed over Richard's shoulder and remarked in mild surprise.
Huh, the Emperor does protect.
Gus noted when he saw how her legs were stuck, but the two broken pillars attached to the slab keeping her pinned had landed in a perfect position to catch and prevent the weight of the rest of the rubble from crushing her.
You should have been done worse than the guy next to you.
In a couple of heartbeats, the initial sentiment that the Catachan had rudely addressed the deceased was swapped with the realization as Bobson surveyed the site and confirmed how the rockcrete embedded with the steel beams had indeed served as protection from the overall destruction. Taking it as verification of faith, the young man smiled and sighed in relief as he moved over to try lifting the slab, but struggling to even nudge it.
Of course, he protects.
Both of the large men stared at the pointless effort of the smaller one, then looked at each other for a moment, shook their heads, and each grabbed a side of the debris. Richard felt like he was almost flung into the air by how suddenly the slab was lifted as he held onto it. He awkwardly stared at the pair and chuckled as he let go, allowing them to throw the piece to the side. Despite the tribulations he had with both of them, he was happy to have them present, since by his estimation it would have probably taken 4 or 5 of his like to lift and carry that particular slab off. After sparing an extra moment to appreciate how convenient that specific piece of rubble and its placement were, he turned and squatted down, extending a hand towards the woman in order to help her up.
You don't have to worry. You're safe now, Miss,
Corday Surratt. And I thank you, sir.
Being addressed as such caused the young man to blush, as he did not realize he had begun to stare at her brown hair and scarlet eyes, which seemed as the only visible features on her due to her pale skin almost melding with her hooded robes. It took Gus clearing his throat for him to catch himself and respond.
Right, it's a pleasure. You can call me Richard, and these with me are...
Don't talk to me, ever.
Johann shot him down as he walked out of view.
Sir would be fine, but you might want to reserve that for someone else. Speaking of, she is coming here, so get ready. This is your responsibility now.
Wildknife added and went away as well.
Yeah, they are not much into conversation. They may seem strange, but they are good people. Just from other worlds where things are done differently.
I can scarcely imagine.
Corday mumbled as she took his hand and stood up alongside Bobson. As she did so, he was able to see that her other arm was robotic and was now holding on to the Voxcaster backpack. Initially, he felt the urge to inquire about the augmetic, but elected not to, considering that they had just met. Instead, he awkwardly advised her.
Indeed. For now, though, I would recommend giving stock of any special skills you may have. Our leader does not want dead weight, so to say. And the main reason we had come after hearing a transmission was because we thought whoever was calling could be useful.
Her eyes shrunk with fright for a moment, following which she shook her head.
I will do my best. Thank you for letting me know.
A soft smile was the only thing Richard was able to offer back at her before the all-too-familiar shadow of Arconi loomed over them from atop the section of rubble in the direction of the truck.
Report, Private. What have you found?
Augmented civilian, sir.
Bobson then stood at attention, with Surratt doing her best to do the same as both of them looked at the Commissar. She, in turn, descended the slope until she reached eye-to-eye with the pair. Or, well, after looking up, since the two Brotelians were relatively the same height, still resolutely Katerina commanded.
State your name and function.
Corday Surratt. I'm a menial from the Hive.
A surprisingly well-off menial, judging by your attire and augmetics.
A hint of suspicion was notable in Arconi's voice.
They're a gift from my husband. He was an officer in the PDF, and due to that we were better off than most, even if it was not by much. He was willing to make me happy, and after my incident, he got me this.
She presented her robotic limb. Touching. There was really no other way for the Brotelian to describe what he was hearing. If he were at liberty to voice his thoughts, he would share how refreshing it was to listen to someone so genuinely human. He meant no offense to his squad with these thoughts, but he could not deny that he had missed this more simple and true humanity. Contrary to him, however, the Commissar was not impressed.
Charming. And what kind of menial were you precisely, as I'm curious how you came to possess the skill set of being able to use a Voxcaster?
I was an aide in a hospice dedicated to PDF veterans. Oftentimes we had emergencies to attend to, due to which some of us received training in the use of the devices. Additionally, while I'm not a medic, I can provide basic first aid and help stabilize wounds.
Her words oozed a plea for survival. Despite her best efforts to mask it, which Katerina could commend, this woman was clearly terrified, though her specific skill set felt slightly too convenient. Was she just saying these things in hopes of assuring her life, or was she genuine? In either case, despite her gut advising her against it, Arconi couldn't afford to be picky right now, and at the very least this was someone else who could monitor Vox frequencies, and even send out messages using the caster she had clung on to, even if she was useless when it came to medical assistance.
Consider this your early sanguinala, miracle menial. Your soft life best not make you shirk any kind of duty that is bestowed unto you, lest on place of the angel's grace you instead find the Emperor's mercy.
After stating so, she turned to leave, billowing her coat with the motion. As dreary as the gesture may have been, theatrics had to be maintained in front of those not directly involved with the guard, either to keep them pacified if they were a truthful ally, or to make it seem like one did not fully see their treachery if they were a serpent waiting to strike. Whatever her true disposition may have been, Corday's face beamed with a smile of relief, causing Richard to quietly exhale, glad that no great disaster had happened.
Thank you,
Surratt exclaimed and bowed deeply. The private was tempted to mimic the motion himself, as he was truly grateful to his commanding officer for agreeing to this rescue mission. When she stood up, the woman launched a question at Arconi, which caused her to halt in her tracks.
Are you also headed towards the shelter complex by the Underhive descent?
Richard found it surprising how similar their routes were, stifling a chuckle from it as he decided to clarify for the menial.
Well,
Yes.
Huh? Bobson thought as he was stumped by hearing Katerina's voice and then seeing her turn back and address the inquiry. Before he could voice his confusion, his superior clarified.
Yes. We have been trying to find resistant pockets to link up with, and given how the surface is mostly overrun, it stands to reason that the biggest survivor groups would have been closer to the Underhive, so we were heading there. Isn't that right, Private?
At the end, she shot him a glance that nearly froze the blood in his veins. The Brotelian had thought to protest, but reason pushed emotion out of his driver's seat in time to bring him the realization that he had already pushed his luck far enough. If the Commissar didn't want to share their true intentions with a civilian right off the bat, Richard wouldn't risk their life by contradicting what was being spoken by her. Instead, he stood at attention and simply replied,
precisely, sir.
Then it would be my pleasure to help.
Corday almost beamed with delight. Bobson couldn't help his sides raising ever so slightly at the reaction, thinking that she was thankful to be allowed both life and service with which to fulfill it.
So, do you know where this shelter complex is?
I don't know its exact location, but I do remember the route we were instructed to navigate to it. I can help navigate you through it, while also trying to intercept any Vox frequencies in order to locate it. At your discretion, of course, ma'am.
Silence loomed for several moments until Katerina spoke.
You make a satisfactory proposition. I will accept it. You may follow us, though sustenance will not be available until tomorrow, since the private here already had his share for the day.
I'm sorry?
Surratt confusedly let out.
I'll explain later. You don't have to worry about it.
Richard chimed in. When they all climbed out of the hole in the rubble, the group's new addition was spooked by a loud yell.
Ha! She lives! Told you.
Gus laughed in contrast to the bemused Gargota and Lawrence.
You both now owe me 5 each.
Monkey, what did we talk about the other day?
Katerina shouted at him with obvious annoyance in her tone.
No need to worry, sir. We aren't gambling with rations, or anything valuable for that matter. Just friendly sport is all.
It better not be.
Arconi growled at and then walked past him. Stepping among the rest of the squad drew worry out of Corday due to them being far more intimidating in visage than Richard. In particular, looking at the 2 masked soldiers made her shiver, a detail that was not to Ramil's liking, prompting him to walk forward and goad her out of the aggravating jittery state.
Cease your fear, woman. Rejoice, for the Emperor has granted you salvation from the Rockreed tomb.
Yes, I'm sorry.
She stammered out as she moved along.
Stop wasting time on the civvy, you lot. Get back on board. We spent far too much time here already.
The commissar turned to Cost.
This one says she knows a way to a shelter, where we can expect reinforcements, so we are changing our course.
Understood, sir.
To the mildly grudging air of some of the squad mates, Surratt got to join them on the front seat of their vehicle, herself and Richard being slightly squished together near the passenger side door, making space for the commissar and her bodyguard. The young man's predicament was fairly disconcerting, as he had never been so close to a lady before, and he did not have the option of turning his face away to either side in order to hide its increasingly reddish tint, as on one hand was the lady in question, and on the other was the woman most likely to kill him. Thus, he instead chose to keep his head low, but the gesture and what it was meant to obfuscate failed in their function when it came to the perception of both women, who could clearly pick up on his state. While Corday feigned not to notice, Katerina just rolled her eyes with mild disgust present on her expression as the truck set off. The next hour or so would be relatively quiet as the captain drove back onto the highways. Looking around, the pale lady seemed impressed with the assembled squad, albeit somewhat afraid from their grim demeanor.
It is remarkable how you've managed to organize yourselves on such short notice. The Emperor's soldiery is truly something to be admired.
She mused, trying to mix praise with submissiveness. No one seemed to pay her any heed other than Richard, who beamed up.
Indeed, though admittedly it is thanks to the Commissar's skill and efforts. We just need to listen to her and obey.
So he is paying attention.
Katerina muttered under her breath, her gaze fixed to the road.
Please.
Corday leaned forward to look past her fellow Brotelian and address his commanding officer.
Allow me to once again thank you for rescuing me. By the time you'd arrived, I'd begun losing hope that anyone would hear, let alone follow my transmission.
Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment,
Arconi flatly said.
You would be better off placing more of yourself in faith.
Right. You're correct, ma'am.
Her meek words were followed by a light chuckle. In the middle of this awkwardness, Surratt could feel her hackles rise and sweat break over her forehead due to an eerie cold sensation seemingly pouring onto her neck. She briefly glanced back, confirming the source of this unease to be the heavily armored, masked giants whose obscured eyes bored into her. Gulping for a moment, she once again turned to the commissar.
If you would like me to, I can try initiating another transmission. Try to establish contact with the shelter?
Absolutely not.
Katerina cut her off.
Us being the ones to pick up on your first broadcast was nothing short of the Emperor's grace shining upon you. But there's no guarantee that some of the Xenos could not have picked it up either. If they knew to destroy the communication arrays, they would know to keep track of any attempted transmission on World as well.
Looking down, Corday sank into her seat as she held tightly onto the Voxcaster she was found with. Seeing her dour expression made the private worry about her mental state, so he decided to try cheering her up.
For now, it might be better to be more careful, but I am sure your skills will be invaluable to us. To begin with, let's focus on reaching the shelter, so please assist us with the directions.
His words seemed to work as a faint smile colored the pale lady's lips, while she nodded her head and looked back at him with a hopeful visage on her face.
Yes, thank you, Richard. You have a good heart. Truly a blessing from him on Terra.
Well,
The blushing young man chuckled.
I wouldn't go that far. I just want his people to be safe and his enemies to be vanquished.
She would return the chuckle, which seemed to be everything that Bobson focused on, as his mind ignored the demeaning reactions coming from around him. Within the following day, they had made significantly more progress towards the Underhive than they had in the time they were following their previous route. As they drove down a sloped road, the relative calm of the interior was first interrupted by the sound of weapons fire, followed closely by what they could deduce was the bursting of the passenger side front tire, as the truck then lurched to the side and the bottom of its bumper slammed and dug into the ground, causing the vehicle to uncontrollably tumble down the slope. Despite his best efforts, Cost could not overcome the power of gravity seizing command of the machine. All the while, nearly everyone was thrashed about between its walls, along with whatever supplies were not tied down. In several intense moments, the entire situation culminated with the thunder of a crash, as the truck was halted in the side of a building, slumped over to the side of its obliterated appendage, leaving its occupants dazed among the noise of glass and bits of rubble showering its exterior shell. A low grunt mixed with a growl escaped the commissar as she wiped away a thin streak of blood that had rolled down her forehead from colliding with the control board of the truck and called out,
Everyone not dead, sound off.
Alive.
Alive, sir.
Alive, sir.
Sir.
Everyone soundly responded, their words intermingled with similar grunts and breaths as they picked themselves up from the vehicle floor, save for one voice. Looking to her right and past the private, Katerina saw the other Brotelian had suffered a similar collision like the one she did, but likely worse, as the side of her head was drenched in blood and her body was not moving.
Did we just lose our newest acquisition that fast?
She barked with evident annoyance. Arconi's voice helped Bobson steady his mind, at which point he immediately turned to Corday in order to check on her. In a heartbeat, his worry about her safety was mildly relieved as he turned back to Katerina and announced,
Still breathing, sir. Just unconscious, it seems.
Well, she better wake up fast. Now, can anyone tell me what in the Emperor's teeth happened?
As if a response to her direct inquiry, everyone's attention was grasped by a voice echoing in the valley created by the demolished structures they had landed in, which spoke in the native Brotelian dialect.
Hello? Anyone still alive down there?
Hearing this caused Richard's heart to sink, his face going pale at the realization that his own people had fired upon them.
That looks like a nice truck you've got there. I bet it's got all sorts of even nicer things in it, since you seem fancier than the PDF dogs. And I hope you don't mind us helping ourselves to it.
While the man yelled, Bobson grit his teeth and growled out,
Hive gangers.
Cursed scum! They dare assault servants of the Golden Throne for petty looting!
And like that, I love my home even more. Because not even the gangers were stupid enough to do shit like this when the orcs invaded us.
As she said so, Gargota picked up and readied her longlass.
And even if you do mind, however, that is irrelevant, given that you are surrounded.
What are your orders, sir?
Lawrence asked of Katerina, who stood motionless, looking down at the board in thought.
Outnumbered and outgunned.
On cue, another round of fire echoed, immediately followed by a dozen pangs impacting their exterior hull, which caused everyone inside to reflexively duck. More yelling resumed from the outside, but to Richard's surprise, he would begin spotting smiles on a few of his comrades' faces, including the commissar.
Why are you smiling?
That was the sound of metal striking metal.
Ramil chuckled.
The heathen fools are using solid slug weapons.
And that is a point of celebration? Are they not just as lethal as normal people as any other weapon?
Just keep quiet for now, Private, and ready your weapon.
Arconi commanded as she raised her last pistol.
You will shortly see the cause for our amusement.
Outnumbered and outgunned!
Flenser called out at the crashed truck. To emphasize his point, several of his goons from around the buildings that made up the makeshift rubble valley fired a small burst of gunfire towards the cornered vehicle.
If you come out and play nice, we might even let you join up with us! Or at the very least give you quick deaths.
Complete silence. When no response, no sound even, came back, the Ganger leader's smirk faded, his face becoming grimmer as it sank into his long black hair. A grumble emanated out of him, following which he asked the goon to his side, who had their band's Voxcaster implanted into his back.
Have you gotten any transmission, chum?
Aye, no, boss. Ever since the original got caught, we haven't gotten anything. Do you think all of them died in the crash?
Depends on who they are.
Flenser muttered as he paced to the other side of the roof in order to get a better view.
That's a PDF crate truck, which appears intact, so it's definitely not the Greeners. Maybe a surviving squad of the Deafies, or some other gang that yoinked it out of them would be my bet. But I lean more towards it being governance-affiliated, since they used the corridor clear of Greeners we made, meaning they don't get no base and we're likely looking for safety. But you're sure they got the signal?
Aye, boss. It's been with them ever since the cut, and the readings on this thing show it's down there.
The goon confirmed as he double-checked with his device. It wasn't out of the question that whoever these nobodies were could be dead down there, but he had not gotten this far in life by assuming things had lined up perfectly for him. Due to this, he briefly put a fist over his mouth in thought, while squeezing the grip of his lasgun with the other hand. It had been the only such weapon that his warband was able to get, which he had allowed to become known as to keep a better edge over the rest of his underlings. One couldn't be too safe in this line of work. With his pondering completed, Flenser instructed.
Tell Jaxie and Moop to go down and check out the crash. In the meantime, I want everyone else on Overwatch and to be ready to pump whoever comes out of there with lead.
Roger that, boss.
In a couple of minutes, the shabby pair of gangers approached the truck under the watchful scopes and sights of their warband.
Damn, Jaxie. Why does the boss keep telling us to go look at stuff before everyone else? Simple, Morb. It's because he trusts us the most. We're his best lads in the gang. Those Deafies or whatever probably got smashed in that crash, and we got first pickings of the loot. Wow. It's very nice of him. Sure is. We might even get some Alaskans out of this thing. You'll see.
When the pair reached the truck and pulled open the doors of its rear, their jovial mood would immediately cease. Before them loomed the steel-carved visages of judgment and death, giving the gangers a moment of pure terror, while in the very next showing them what they had mulled about, lasguns. The fear induced in them would never again wash away as the weapons unleashed their fury, Ramil's obliterating one of the gangers' head, while Gruber's the other's upper body. Not wasting a heartbeat, the ironclad pair leapt off their vehicle and raised their weapons, firing into the buildings as they stepped forward. Flenser's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets in 3 stages. First, when his men were gunned down out of the blue. Next, when he saw their armored murderers leap into action. And lastly, when a whole gaggle of strangely dressed hostiles followed suit after them. Worse yet, the few gangers that had opened fire were becoming stunned to see their slugs harmlessly bouncing off the first pair's plate, while the rest used them as mobile cover with which to advance. Just as their leader was about to call out to his forces that the front was carapace armored, his confusion of seeing 2 PDFs, one of which was off-color, intermingled with the handful of strange-looking weirdos was dashed when he saw it. The big hat.
Cartefis! These are Cartefis!
He bellowed, echoing out across the makeshift valley.
Lay cover fire and retreat! Retreat!
As soon as the words left his lungs, he loosed a burst of las bolts down at the enemy formation, trying to aim for their leader, following which he turned around to run down into the building whose roof he was standing on, followed by his immediate aides. Hearing his words only made Katerina smile more confident, as she was sure that the same went for the rest of her squad, with one possible exception. Her eyes were able to find the source of the shout. Registering that he had a lasgun was mildly concerning, but she was pleased to have her assumption confirmed. Fear had gripped their would-be assailants, or at the very least, it had done so to the one meant to organize them. The enemy leader's fire was poorly aimed, but its last few shots would have struck true had Arkani not rushed forward, pressing her back against that of the corporal, with the last couple of las bolts impacting the thick carapace on his left shoulder, leaving smoldering but fairly harmless scorch marks. Emboldened by this, the Maccabian laughed maniacally and roared out a challenge of his own as his fire brought low one of the gangers standing on ground level.
Behold, heathen filth! The Emperor protects the faithful. Prepare thyselves for his judgment, for I am the wrath of Drusus, and I shall give none of you mercy.
Squad, advance!
The commissar joined him with her own shouting.
Catch me a few traitors for interrogation if possible, but for the rest of them, I give you your orders. Search and destroy. Hunt down these spineless vermin.
6 other voices joined in their roar and flew into the air, while the bodies of several enemies tumbled down from the vantage points they had occupied. Ramil and Johann continued to advance in the open, providing cover to the rest, who would break off in pairs and run into the infested buildings so they could begin clearing them out. A squad of 6 gangers were rushing down the metal stairwell of the building they had previously occupied.
Remember to stay calm and move. We'll be out through the back, regroup with whoever is left with the jeeps, and be out in no time.
The one at their lead called out in an attempt to keep their unit's cohesion. His effort was sadly in vain, as the fairly undisciplined troops' descent was halted and all of them dropped themselves on the stairs when they heard the shout,
"Grenade!"
followed by the sound of something clanging on the metal in front of them. They all barely had a moment to see that the something in question was just a piece of rockcrete before Lasfire systematically gunned them down. A couple tried firing back blindly, but were dispatched before they could achieve any success. Only the ganger in the back of the squad was able to get up and run back up the stairs without being shot. He climbed a few flights before bursting through the broken door that gave entry to that floor and collapsed a few feet in front of it. At that moment, the man regretted skipping in all of those exercise drills thanks to being friends with the boss. All of which was without mentioning the racing of his heart. Dealing with the small Xenos and evading the big ones was simple, and dispatching the occasional PDF did not pose too much of a challenge, but he had not signed up to contest actual guardsmen. His haggard breathing tensed away when he heard footsteps following by. Just as whoever was climbing up was about to go past the door, the ganger sprayed his autogun with a wrathful roar across the length of the wall and door opening until it clicked empty. As he frantically tried to reload, he noted the sound of someone getting up. Despite the torn-up wall, the ganger had shot too high, so the pursuer was able to avoid the shower of slugs by dropping down. In a couple of steps, the frantic attempt to find his extra magazine was halted when said pursuer entered the corridor. An imposing mountain of musculature, which the ganger could swear was a miniature of the ogrins he had seen in the labor corps of his sector's manufactorums. Despite his size, he appeared to be unarmed. With a jolt of fright, the ganger dropped his empty gun and reached for his boot, from which he pulled out a switchblade.
Stay back! I have a knife!
Rather than being intimidated, the larger man just smiled and began to laugh, further confusing the terrified ganger. After a couple of moments, the muscular mountain spoke.
"Buddy, that's not a knife."
Following which he reached behind his back and pulled out a girthy blade which was almost the size of his forearm in length. Then, with a smirk, he added,
"This is a knife."
The ganger's body began to shudder at the sight, which resulted in his eyes rolling up as he flopped on his back, passing out cold. Gus would roll his eyes, putting back his knife as he dismissively chuckled out.
Soft welders.
And shook his head as he went to bind and bag his catch. Contrary to the commando's good luck, Lawrence and Richard were having a notably more difficult time as they had engaged in a more active firefight with the demi-squad of the gangers. They had caught them within the corridors of the building they had infiltrated and immediately engaged from range, which proved nearly futile due to the walls granting both sides ample protection. However, the 4 enemies were slowly but surely pushed back, due to not wishing to wager themselves against Lasfire more so than the assaulting pair did against their solid slugs. The first decisive lull in the fight would come as the scabs exfiltrated themselves to a room further back, which they believed held an exit, as the last man who covered them mistimed the pause of his fire, giving Dusk the opportunity to burst forward from his cover and gun him down before he could round the corner. His surviving comrades didn't spare even a side glance, let alone a turn of their heads for his sacrifice, as they stuffed themselves in the room, closing the metal door behind themselves. All of them would release a sigh of relief, before said sensation was replaced with vexation when they saw that they had entered the wrong one. Instead of the expected exit, they found themselves in a rockcrete box at the bottom of a narrow corridor, meaning that they couldn't try bursting out as they would be stuck in single file, which would make them easy pickings that couldn't efficiently fire back. Resigning themselves to their fate, the three flipped over a couple of crates into makeshift concealment and prepared an overwatch on the door, the thing trapping them in also ensuring that their assailants would also be stuck coming in single file.
Piss off, Deafy scum, you can't breach us!
One of the gangers bellowed out in hope of discouraging the pursuing guardsmen. When he did so, the attacking pair had come to the corner of the corridor. A single look at it, along with the man's words, were all that the Cadian needed to understand the situation.
More so you can't escape, shitboot! You're stuck! Why don't you just put those guns to your head and spare us the trouble of dealing with you?
Even if you were to get out, you wouldn't be able to make it far. Surrender!
Richard chimed in.
Like Fifty Frag, we will!
The same man responded after confirming that his compatriots' minds were on the same page as his. While he continued to heap insult after insult at the pair, the sergeant scanned the surroundings for any means of overcoming this predicament. Shortly after, he noticed a ventilation port up on the wall going in the same direction as the corridor.
Stall them. Make a little bit of noise. Be ready to rush them when you hear me enter.
He instructed Bobson and walked over to the port. Once he noticed it as well, the private nodded in affirmation and yelled back at the gangers.
You're merely delaying the inevitable. What's the point of resisting when you can't stand up to such firepower?
To emphasize the point, he loosed a small burst of blast fire down the corridor. Taking the loud reverberation as his cue, Lawrence blew open the lock of the port with his own weapon, pried it open and crawled into it. Favor shone on his plan as the riled-up gangers let their own guns roar out a couple of bursts into the door of the room in order to match the young man's fervor, allowing the Cadian to approach their position nearly undetected. Among all the shouting and firing, the more talkative of the gangers momentarily paused as he noticed something.
Hey, why's only one of them yelling at us?
He asked his squadmates. Rather than their mouths, the response to his question came from above as the room's ventilation grate was pushed out and Dusk crashed down on top of him, momentarily knocking him out. Before the other pair could react, the Cadian put 2 lasbolts in each of their chests, which caused them to collapse dead. Not wasting any time, Lawrence took out a rope from his satchel and began binding the arms of the ganger he had mounted behind his back. Just as he did so, Richard burst through the door, ready to fire, but halted himself when he saw that everything had already been handled. Chuckling sheepishly, he addressed his senior.
Back to your favorite activity, I see, sir.
I will shoot you, Greenhorn.
Dusk grimly stated and pointed at Richard before adding.
I'll deal with this one here. You better have a run back to our vehicle in order to make sure it isn't getting looted under our noses.
Understood.
Bobson affirmed with a quick salute, then turned to leave post-haste. As soon as he left the building, Richard ran back to the truck.
Corday,
He yelled in the hope that the newest addition to their squad had woken up from her concussion, but was cut off when he noticed that the passenger seat's door was open. Carefully approaching with his lasgun at the ready, Bobson crept up and jumped with the muzzle forward in the view of the door, only to find the interior empty. Surratt was gone, and so was the Voxcaster which she had brought along with herself. As he began investigating what had happened, the Brotelian heard a faint echo of static deeper into the building that they had crashed in. Breathing in, he began sneaking his way towards its source. Shortly after, the static was overtaken by voices. One unfamiliar, and the other, to Richard's horror, easily recognizable, as he froze, back pressed against the wall, and listened to what was being said around the corner.
One talking message? You couldn't say one talking bloody message? Let's go picked up by Carteffi with a carbot on them.
Echoed the shouts, given a metallic note by the Voxcaster, which was broadcasting them. Whoever was on the other end sounded winded as the clamor of hasty steps accompanied their words.
Those faceless husks and the bitch with the big hat were hawking me the whole time.
The white-clad woman snapped back.
I couldn't sneak in a breath without at least 2 of them keeping tabs on me, let alone sending an unsanctioned Vox missive.
And you still brought them to us? You knew we would not get up to handle this level of heat.
By the old Messiah's left nut, we both know damn well that if you didn't hear back from me in the given time, you would have assumed I betrayed you and come to kill me. Or that I was dead and you just abandoned me to actually die. I didn't really have a lot of options.
Ah, enough! I'm getting out through the south end and extract yourself sent Alfred!
Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of blast fire, followed by a loud thump as if something heavy had dropped.
Flanzer! Flanzer! Answer me, damn it!
She yelled into the Voxcaster, which she shook out of frustration.
Corday.
The woman visibly froze, slowly turning her head to the side, horror present on her face upon seeing the private looming over from the corner of her concealment, lasgun pointed in her direction.
Richard, please hear me out.
You betrayed us and led us into this ambush?
It's not like what you're thinking. Please, just give me a moment to explain.
Surat tried to defuse the situation, slowly setting down the Voxcaster and attempting to stand up. Before she could even straighten to half of her height, her soothing words were replaced with a shrill of pain caused by a lasbolt striking her midsection. Her white-clad form became a mix of burned black and darkening red as it fell backwards from her position, while her vocalization of pain ceased from the several more shots that pierced her upper body through the lungs, throat, and lastly taking off the upper part of her head. Across from her steaming corpse, Bobson stood, shaking, the barrel of his lasgun sizzling from the discharge's heat. His eyes struggled to hold back tears as his teeth clamped down on themselves. In a few dozen heartbeats, the Brotelian forced his eyes shut, his head lowering as his breathing rose. Once more opening them, the torrent of liquid behind him could no longer be held back, as the young man bellowed out in pain. His face had become flushed with red and his chest slowed down its intake of air, until the pressure of his head was slightly relieved. When he became more stable, Richard sniffed loudly to stop his unsightly display, then picked up the Voxcaster and turned around, walking away without looking back. Passing by the crashed truck on his way out, the Brotelian tossed the Voxcaster on the front seat and closed the passenger side door, following which he walked back out on the streets in order to watch out for any incoming gangers and the return of his squadmates. Rage, confusion, and sorrow stormed in the young man's mind, preventing him from keeping track of time until he finally saw figures approaching in the distance. Squinting his eyes, he recognized them as the rest of their band. Gus carrying someone on his shoulder, while Lawrence, flanked by Johann and Ramil, prodded forward the ganger that the Cadian and the private managed to pin down earlier.
I think that is. Just you wait till the boss comes down. He'll mulch you all, I tells you.
The conscious captive barked back, mildly struggling against the binding of his hands.
The sinner is welcome to try, but shall find naught but failure in the face of the Emperor's servants.
Before any further exchange could occur, everyone's attention was captivated by the sound of a window high on one of the buildings shattering outward, followed by its glass crashing down on the broken street. Thanks to the air currents and the acoustics of the artificial demolished valley, those below became privy to sounds of struggle, the occasional discharge of las, and squabbling voices, which all ended with what sounded like a powerful strike and a body being defenestrated out, followed by a mournful cry.
Boss!
Mere seconds later, Flenser connected with the ground, splattering over the rubble. Most of the guardsmen began to laugh heartily at the display as the ganger in their custody slumped down to his knees in disbelief. They would all pause when frustration was vented from the same window.
Emperor's thief. I kicked him too hard. Damn it!
A good kill, sir, but keep your elbow up. Your guard was open.
You dare do that Thank you, Kost. I will keep that in mind. Now get the augmented one to move. He will have to stand in for the leader.
Several minutes later, Arconi and her pristine shadow would exit the building with a captive of their own, the goon who bore the Voxcaster in his flesh, at about the same time when the unconscious ganger woke up. Whatever bluster and bravado they may have harbored apparently died with their leader, as the commissar cracked them to spill any information they had about their band's numbers, confirming that everyone had been killed by the guardsmen, and the location of their convoy vehicles, which also held their supplies. Dusk was assigned to remain with the truck in order to put the spare tire on it, along with Burgundy, who would act as guard and cover for any potential reprisal, and the monkey, who would help with the physical labor. The rest, including their prisoners, instead went to secure whatever they could carry from the convoy in question. The one that was captured by the sergeant would find a bit of his courage on their way, making the occasional snub, but no remarks that would immediately dispatch him. When they reached their destination, the gangers were forced to their knees under the Krieger's guard, while the Mordian and Brotelian were tasked with keeping watch on their position. As they did so, Katerina and Gargota went to inspect the vehicles in case they were rigged with traps. Thankfully, no such impediment was found. Contrary to that, there wasn't that much of value with the handful of buggies that the miscreants had in their service. They, Arconi surmised, were nowhere near as efficient with their use of resources, or they had a stash that was only known to some of the dead and not to those that still drew breath. She briefly considered commandeering them, but decided against it. The buggies were too big to fit in the far more useful truck, and not useful enough to merit wasting the precious little fuel they had on them.
How dare you!
Before she could give any order regarding what to be appropriated, Katerina's thoughts were interrupted by the Brotelian's shout. She whirled with her last pistol ready to shoot in a single motion when she registered the chatter among the 4 natives escalate in volume. To her annoyance, but also relief, no one had tried to escape. Instead, the young man had started arguing with the gangers and was now yelling at them. With a sigh, she instructed Steelix to prepare what little was on the scum's vehicles for harvest, then walked towards the steaming argument.
How dare you!
Richard repeated with greater indignation in his voice.
I can't believe you would be this stupid. You honestly think just to survive is a valid excuse to be attacking people like that?
It's easy for you to say, kid.
The verbose ganger Bobson had helped capture spat back at him.
You're just a deaf youth as an off-world, a bootlicker. Look at you, all submissive and dedicated to people who'd soon crash and spit on you. If you look at them in the way they dislike. It's frankly disgusting how you put more value on helping off-worlders than your fellow Brotelians.
The formerly unconscious ganger added.
Oh really? Really?
Bobson snapped back at them.
I'm the disgusting one, because I am trying to aid the forces fighting the orcs? That's rich coming from you, 'cause I didn't see you cocking patriots defend anyone but your avarice. And oh, you know, preying upon the very people whose dead bodies you're trying to extract sympathy from in the face of a thrown-damn Xenos incursion?
Ah, boo-hoo, Screamer boy.
The augmented one began.
What would the green like so you know about survival? The fees are all the same. You get crushed your lives in fancy uniforms. All the rest of us gotta make tough choices to even be able to live.
The likes of you could have supported the temples, rather than trying to rob them. You could have tried banding together with other people in militia formations to try and reclaim the ground from the greenskins. You could have cut the Grok's shit about deafies and whatnot, and shown some fething humanity in opposition to the inhuman beasts. But you did none of that. Your kind never do that, and I know this from when I was just a random nobody in the streets that could have ended up like you, if I had not come across and been raised by better people.
Richard breathed in to replenish his lungs, all the while struggling to hold back tears caused by his overwhelming fury.
Look at him, boys! The little sniveler's gonna cry!
The first ganger muttered in a mocking tone to his compatriots.
You have no idea how much effort I've put into presenting our world as a good, decent place to the servants of the Emperor. But now, rather than something the master of mankind can be proud of, Brotel's image will remain smeared by the faces of scum like you. Scum that I am ashamed to know come from the same home as me.
Private.
Further words were cut off by the bark. Richard hastily turned around, tears now streaming down his sides. Their influx would increase when he saw Katerina standing at arm's length away from him with her last pistol pointed in his direction. Indignation became replaced with sorrowful horror as he thought that she would have him put down after seeing the human filth he technically belonged to. He was about to break down, but before he could embarrass himself like that, she scolded him.
You do not cry in front of an enemy, so wipe away those fountains. Show some backbone and take responsibility like I told you to do before all of this took place.
After those words, she flipped the last pistol in her hand, catching it by the barrel and extending it to Bobson. He in turn looked down at the weapon with momentary confusion before wiping away the streams and firmly replying,
"Forgive me, sir. It won't bear repeating, sir."
Then took the last pistol and turned around to face the 3 kneeling captives, who had begun to chuckle at the display.
I'm sure you must have seen this done during public disciplinary actions.
The private nodded.
Then, assume the pose. Breathe in, squeeze the trigger, breathe out, and repeat.
Her voice was stern, but with a hint of warmth in it. Following the instructions, Richard spread his feet in a wide stance, placing his left arm with a clenched fist behind his back, and held the last pistol pointed down at the augmented ganger, taking in a single deep breath. The 3 in question still remained rather amused, with the talkative one addressing the commissar.
Listen, lass, you might be scary, but nowhere near enough to make up for this wuss. He's probably never harmed a fly in his life, let alone have the spine to keep.
The augmented ganger collapsed backwards, his face obliterated by the shot, its remaining bits of flesh sizzling while blood poured out. In the very next moment, Bobson exhaled and moved to stand over the next captive. Any moxie and amusement that the pair may have regained was suddenly dashed as they panicked and tried to scurry away. Unfortunately for them, Johann and the now returned Kost barred their way and kicked them back into position. The formerly unconscious one was put to permanent sleep, with his own face erased.
Frank, I'm sorry, please don't. Buddy, come on. Protelian, you don't have to do this. Just let me go and you will never see me again. I swear it on the
The Dreg's foul mouth was prevented from tarnishing the Emperor's name with a final shot that also took away the ganger's visage. One less stain on Brotel, Richard thought, as he exhaled. However, as the trash's final words began to sink in, the young man's knees gave in and he slumped to a kneeling position, the streams in his eyes once again releasing their valves as his breathing steadily increased. Before it could become more demeaning, Richard felt a hand on his shoulder. His gaze traced its length back to Arconi's stoic face, looking down on him.
You did good, maggot. These vermin had nothing to do with you or your world. Now stop moping. We need to get back on the road.
Yes, sir.
With that, he stood up and handed her back the last pistol. The scene was mildly interrupted by a displeased grumble coming out of the Krieger.
What is it?
I wanted to shoot them.
Katerina rolled her eyes.
You'll get to shoot the next batch of prisoners we take, Ruber. Now move along. 1 baby is more than enough for my nerves, and I don't need a second one.
After everyone had assembled and taken the valuables they could use, they made their way back to the truck. As they walked, Gargota raised a brow as if remembering something and asked,
Hey, whatever happened to that woman in the white robe?
Sweat broke on the private's brow, realizing that he had not yet told the others about Corday's betrayal, and she was never brought up as a topic to which the captive gangers could speak about.
Well, she
was abducted and killed by one of the gangers that tried to appropriate our vehicle.
Katerina sharply cut him off.
The private here was able to kill him when he went back to check in on the truck, but was not able to save her. A shame to lose a pair of technologically capable hands, but in the end she was just a CV. Nothing we should spare additional brain power on.
Bobson's eyes widened slightly at the realization. The Commissar already knew. Satisfied with the response, no one else bothered to ask any further questions on the matter. When they were almost united with the repair team, both Arconi and the Brotelian had lagged slightly behind. Using this opportunity, the young man inquired of his superior.
Sir, how did you know?
Her transmission to their boss was audible in the building he had holed up in. As we approached him, myself and Kost heard their entire exchange.
She looked at him with a stern expression.
Consider this a gift for maintaining your dedication, doing the right thing, Private. I have no intention to lie on your behalf again. If you wish to offset any further stain we find on your planet, you will have to work extra hard for it.
Now understanding, Richard couldn't help but smile softly and nodded his head before saying,
I swear on my life, sir, I won't let you down and I won't make you regret making that gift.
A single nod and grumble of approval was the only response he received as the pair rejoined the squad.
Join me, brother Grotz, in liking the video and subscribing the channel. Together we will conquer the algorithm and gather 200 views. Long live the revolution!
Sometime later, the abandoned trio's corpses would be disturbed, as the machine clinging to the Voxganger's cold flesh still harbored some life of its own. After about a dozen beeps, the caster activated and began to transmit a message from some unknown location. And while the unknown speaker did little better than venting his mouth, as there was no one present who could hear him, that was a detail he was not aware of. Thus, when he heard no objection after his call was picked up, he simply spoke in a slight whisper.
Oi! Oi, Bolton! Where you at? Did you all finish double-crossing Flint's already? You said you'd be done with us last shop under him. Get him off his spire and sail away so we could regroup with all the loot. So where's your message been? You aren't trying to double-cross me, right? 'Cause you know that will cost you a lot. Fitting hell, the idiot might have put his books on automated messaging. Could you even do that with the Voxcaster? Or are you just hearing this in your brain and not responding 'cause now it's not convenient? In any case, wrap up what you're doing and Vox me back when you can. In the meantime, you can gather whatever schmucks you have left and start making your way down. Me and my boys come across a couple of strangers, made them believe that we're PDF and here called to help them. Can you imagine that? These are the morons, I tell you. They're leading us to the hideout as they speak. Soon as we reach it, we'll gun them down. Grab whatever they have and wait for you, so we know what exact numbers we're working with. I might have to close the transmission for now since we seem to be getting closer to a destination. Wouldn't want our new friends to...
The man suddenly interrupted himself as the sound of a sudden gust of air could be heard near him. Whatever the reason, it was enough of a distraction for him to forget to switch off his own Vox feed as he continued.
Oi, Davis, where did you go? Cross, did you see where Davis went?
A muffled, I don't know, became briefly audible in the background, before it was deafened by a loud crash of metal.
What the frig is that thing?
His question was answered by a shrill roar, accompanied by the sound of an autogun and lasgun fire, intermingled with screams of terror.
What the blood? Get me out of here!
The man's voice ended in a watery gargle, before being permanently silenced. His transmission, however, would remain active for several more moments before finally being cut off. If anyone had been present, they would only hear the continued screaming and roaring intermingled with the sound of fire and the noises of flesh and bone being forever parted.